Hi, I am Carlo Rizzi, Artistic Director of Opera Rara, and I would like to welcome you to this online Insight event. We celebrate this year in very strange circumstances, but we celebrate the 50th anniversary of this organization that was born in 1970. And to tell you the history and also the story, because it's a very good story, of Opera Rara, we have got two eminent musicologists, Roger Parker and Ditlev Rindom. They will bring you through the years and through all the events and the milestones that Opera Rara reached in this half a century. And I will be joining them at the end for a question and answer. So please enjoy, and I'm looking forward to see you in a few minutes.
Well, hello. I'm here to talk about the 50th anniversary of Opera Rara and to give you a little bit of the history of how the thing started. It was in 1970, and there were two opera buffs of the old school, Patrick Schmidt and Don White, who decided that the operas of Verdi and Bellini and Donizetti were only known by a couple of titles, and they knew that there was a huge reservoir of unknown opera out there. So they thought they would explore this and put on concerts. That's what they did, and these concerts were so successful that pretty soon the concerts got pirated onto discs and were making other people money. So they thought, well, we'll make our own records and see what we can do with that. So they started, their first recording was in the mid-1970s. It was of Ugo Conte di Parigi and had some of the really fine singers of the time, and was an immense success. At the same time, Opera Rara had the great benefit of getting permanent finance from the Peter Moores Foundation. This was an enormous boon to them and allowed them to do more or less whatever they wanted after that time in the way of recordings. It was a hugely prolific time with some wonderful monuments to Italian opera created. I have a few memories of that early period, well, a little later in the 1980s. I was living in America, but much involved with Donizetti. Someone told me we were working on an edition of Maria Stuarda, and we thought we discovered something really important, a bit of a new aria for the soprano, but someone told me, you should ring up Patrick Schmidt and find out what he knows about it. I remember calling him and saying, look, Patrick, we've discovered this enormously important bit of this aria. And there was a pause, and then across the transatlantic line, he sang me the bit that I thought I discovered. His knowledge was encyclopedic, and there were virtually no constraints on finances. There were some amazing recordings appearing at that period. If I had to choose one, the one that's particularly special to me is one of Rosmonda d'Inghilterra by Donizetti. It was written in 1834, so just between Lucrezia Borgia and Lucia di Lammermoor, a sort of classic period for Donizetti. And one of the things that Patrick could always do is persuade the very best singers to come along and record for him. So in this case, we have Bruce Ford as the tenor and a very young Renee Fleming doing her first operatic recording as Rosmonda. The two of them are, of course, soprano and tenor, remembering their love in the past.
Giuri tuoi
Okay, so in 2005, Patrick Schmidt died tragically young, and more or less at the same time, the Peter Moores Foundation was winding down its activities. So those two events caused a huge crisis in the development of Opera Rara, as you can imagine. The person that took over as chief executive was Stephen Revel. And it's really to Stephen that we owe the continuation of the company in this really dire time. He was incredibly optimistic, incredibly hardworking, and decided to get together a new team. One of them was me, but and much more critical was the arrival of Charles Alexander as chairman of the Opera Rara board, and especially, of course, of Mark Elder as artistic director. And then a couple of years later, Henry Little came in as chief executive. So we decided immediately that what we needed to do with Opera Rara is expand the purview of it, not concentrate just on bel canto Italian opera, but expand into French opera and also into Verismo opera, later 19th century opera. And I'm going to hand over to Ditlev now, who's going to tell us a bit about one of these excursions into the Verismo territory.
Thanks, Roger. So, as Roger mentioned, Opera Rara has historically focused on bel canto repertory, and it's been very closely involved with the revival of all these early 19th century Italian operas in this part of this revival that really was taking place from the mid-20th century onwards. And that's obviously still going to be an important part of Opera Rara's future, but the company is now exploring new areas from the late 19th century Italian opera, French grand opera, and operetta. And in some ways, this might seem quite a surprising move, actually, because we do think we know the Italian Verismo movement pretty well. I mean, basically all of Puccini's operas are now regularly performed. But when we look at the repertory today, most of the really other familiar names, Mascagni, Leoncavallo, Giordano, Catalani, are really only represented by one, maybe two works. Now, that's, of course, not to say that all of their unknown works are as good as Bohème or Tosca, of course. But the fact is that this was actually an incredibly challenging time for a composer to make a mark with a new piece. This is the era of repertory opera, so new composers had to compete with all of these older works by Verdi and Rossini and so on. And the musical scene's also becoming very international, so Italian theatres are frequently playing pieces by Massenet, by Gounod, Wagner, eventually even Tchaikovsky and Mussorgsky. So the stakes had really been raised. And looking beyond Italy, fashions are also changing, so in the second half of the 19th century, grand opera really declines in popularity. Wagner becomes the new aesthetic model. And there's also much more of a trend for sort of short pieces, one-act pieces like Cavalleria Rusticana, not these big epic 4 or 5-act operas. So I think when we approach the period again with fresh eyes and ears and different values, there are still a lot of gems to discover. Now, in terms of Italian repertory, Opera Rara has already branched out into the late 19th century with Lavilli, Puccini's first work. And one of the other big pieces they worked to put back on the map is Leoncavallo Zazà. This was premiered in 1900, and it was really quite a big success at the time, but it never managed to become a really firm part of the repertory. And within about 20 years of being premiered, it had stopped being regularly performed. Now, very much like Tosca, Zazà was also based on a very successful French play, and it tells the story of a cabaret singer who has an affair with a man called Miglio, who she discovers is actually married. And very much like Leoncavallo's Pagliacci, the opera has a lot of dance music in it and lots of scenes of music making actually within the opera. And we'd like to share with you a clip from the third act when Zazà goes to her lover's house and she meets his daughter, and the daughter reveals to Zazà what's actually been going on. And this is a really fascinating scene, a wonderful example of how composers in this period were interested in experimenting with different musical registers. So the child has a spoken role, and she also plays the piano on stage, Cherubini's Ave Maria, while Zazar sings. And the effect of this spoken role makes the child somehow otherworldly. We might find this a bit disconcerting or a bit sentimental, actually. But it's a brilliant dramatic effect. Zazar is a singer, she lives in a kind of fantasy world, and speech then becomes the world of truth and of innocence. And this is also just really a difficult effect to pull off in the theatre, I think, and probably one of the reasons why the opera is not done very often. So let's have a listen.
I mentioned earlier that there were new ambitions for the company at this period. And one of the things that we continue to do, as well as experimenting with these Verismo works, is try to find new works from the bel canto repertory that would really grab the public's attention. And Mark, obviously, it's very much at the center of one of his interests as well. So we explored Donizetti's Les Martyrs, one of his grand operas. We rediscovered, with the help of an Italian musicologist, Candida Mantica, we rediscovered Donizetti's completely unknown opera L'Ange de Nisida. We also experimented with Offenbach and his Fantasio, the later works of Offenbach, which are not so well known. But I think the boldest thing that happened in this period was actually something, it was Mark's idea, was to do a new recording of Rossini's Semiramide. Now, this is not a rare opera. Everyone thinks they know Semiramide, but they know it from a sort of mythic, iconic recording by Joan Sutherland and Richard Bonning from a long time ago now. And with what we might say is a rather old-fashioned now idea of how Rossini might communicate dramatically. So Mark's idea was to use the orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment, to use original instruments and to reimagine this work and create a new kind of drama with it. The remarkable thing about this series of operas that was done at that period was that they had such an international success. They won awards. Each one of those operas won a prestigious international award. And it wasn't always awards just for rediscovered works, but actually for the best opera of the entire year. So as an example of this, I want to play you a clip from Semiramide, which is with two of Opera Rara's kind of family of international artists. One of the most important things that we do, I think, is establish relationships with the best singers. And this is Albina Shaggy-Muratova and Daniela Barcellona singing the famous duet from Act 2 of Semiramide. Talked about this family of artists which Opera Rara tries to cultivate. And one of the ideas we had for this was that for certain members of the family, we would institute a series of recital discs in which the artist would recreate the repertory of a historical singer from the past. This allows us, among other things, to experiment a little more freely with the repertory. We can put a toe into an enormous opera, for example, and find one aria and see whether that works well. And one of the examples of this that I wanted to play you was Michael Spire's recital disc, which was an attempt to recreate the repertory of Gilbert Louis Dupré in the middle of the 19th century. And this is a clip from an opera by Halévy called Guido e Ginevra. Now, this is an opera no one knows. It's not, there are no arias on YouTube or anything like that, or at least before Michael's recording. And what happened here is that Michael joined up with another member of the family, Joyce L. Khoury, to record a duet from Guido e Ginevra. And one of the things that happens in this is that the tenor and soprano are singing their love duet, and suddenly the stage is invaded by a series of alarming looking bandits who are roaming around the city. Well, we didn't have the resources to create the bandits, so we did what I hope is a rather sinister trombone ensemble to imitate them. So here's this example from Guido e Ginevra, which is conducted by our new artistic director, Carlo Rizzi.
Entends-tu ces bandits? Je suis ton défenseur. C'est la condamnée, qu'à mort de ma destinée, va laisser l'infortunée, laissez-moi subir mon sort. Qui t'est celle qui me chère, toi mon bien, ma vie entière, je ne craindrai sur la terre, rien que dans la paix encore, rien que dans la paix.
So those bandits playing us out there brings us to thoughts of the future. Plans abound. There are all sorts of things that we want to do, and actually some things which yet haven't been released that we want to talk about. I'm going to hand over to Ditlev now to tell us about one of those.
Yes, so one of the projects Opera has been working on recently has been another recital disc with a member of the family, Manela Yaho, which she recorded in Valencia in last year in November with the orchestra there and the conductor Andrea Battistoni. And this recital explores the career of the Italian soprano Rosina Storchio, who was a very famous singer from the late 19th and early 20th century, who premiered several important works. Most famously, Puccini's Madama Butterfly, but also Leoncavallo's La Bohème and Zaza, Giordano's Siberia, and Mascagni's Lodoletta. But she also had an enormous repertoire of other pieces, operas by Massenet, Verdi, Catalani, Bellini, the list goes on. And as Roger says, Operaras has already had this tradition of recitals exploring the careers of 19th century singers, but mainly from the first half of the 19th century. And again, this makes all sorts of sense from historical reasons, because normally we think of the early 19th century as sort of the heyday of operatic divas and divos, when they had a lot more power. And by the late 19th century, the composer really had more authority. But singers were still very important, influential in lots of other ways. They made recordings, they even made films, and they were photographed. And the kind of aesthetic they cultivated could also influence composers. And they could also shape all sorts of performing conventions in older works. And Storchio was a really great example of this. She worked closely with a lot of Italian composers of the time. And Puccini had actually chosen Storchio for Butterfly 2 years in advance of the premiere. The other important point to make here, I think, is that exploring the career of a soprano like this also allows us to put women more strongly back into operatic history in the 19th century. We might struggle to find many operas written by women, but we can still recognize their achievements in other ways. So here we'd like to share with you an unusual clip, I think, from Valencia, from the recording sessions of the aria Mimi Pinson La Biondinetta from Leoncavallo's La Bohème. But first we're going to have Storchio's own recording and then Emanuela's.
Yeah, we've got one other complete opera that's going to be released fairly soon. That's Donizetti's Il Paria, which was Mark Elder's final recording as the artistic director. But there are plenty of plans for the future as well. Carlo Rizzi's first complete opera with Opera Rara in his new post is going to be Donizetti's Il Furioso all'Isola di San Domingo, which we've created with the help of a young Italian musicologist, Eleonora Di Cinzio. We've created a new critical edition. We found some new pieces. So this is something that regrettably has been postponed, but will be recorded now next year. And there's all sorts of other plans. One of the things that we really, really want to do now is do a complete recording of Guido e Ginevra by Alevi, if we can possibly manage to raise the considerable resources that are going to be needed. We also have other plans for the Verismo, including Leoncavallo's Zingari, So we've got all sorts of plans here. We're brimming with optimism, even in these rather dark times. And we really hope that you can be there to join us in our plans. So if anyone has any questions for Carlo, Henry, Ditlev, or me, we'll be happy to try and answer them.
I'm Henry Little, Chief Executive of Opera Rara, and I'm delighted to say that I'm still joined by Carlo Rizzi, Artistic Director, Roger Parker, Artistic Dramaturge, and Ditlev Rindom, the young musicologist who has worked with us on Ermanela Yaho's recording Anima Rara. So in the meantime, I'm happy to say some more questions have come in the meantime, and I'll start with one which actually I'll answer, which was to ask us when the new dates are for the Furioso project. As you know, very sadly, we had to postpone this project. It was to have taken in place, in fact, last Monday, this very Monday this week at the Barbican, but we had to postpone it for obvious reasons. But I'm delighted to say that it's moved on by more or less exactly 1 year. We will make the recording at the end of June into the beginning of July, and the concert performance conducted by Carlo, which will be his first full studio opera recording and concert with Opera Rara, which we are tremendously excited about, will happen on the 8th of July. It's at the Barbican Centre. Tickets are on sale now, so I would encourage you to book them while you can. And I'm delighted to say that the vast majority of the cast that we had assembled for this year's project will return next year, including Albina Shaggy-Muratova, who has had such a big success with us singing the title role in Semiramide, and also more recently singing the soprano role in Il Paria, which we will release this January. That clears up that question. Meanwhile, there have been a number of questions about our next release, which is Anima Rara, Ermanela Yaho's debut recital recording, something that we at Opera Rara are tremendously excited about. And here to tell you a little bit more is Ditlev.
Thanks, Henry. So yes, we're delighted that this release is going ahead as scheduled. The album's going to be released on the 25th of September, so it's exactly 3 months to the day from now. But there are also going to be a series of singles or individual tracks released from the beginning of July. So every 2 weeks, there'll be a new one available as a sort of taster for when the CD comes out on the 25th of September. But the idea for this recital really was that it was going to be an homage to Rosina Storchio, who was a very important soprano from the late 19th, early 20th century, who now is probably most famous for having premiered Puccini's Madama Butterfly. But she worked very closely with a lot of important Italian composers from this time. But she also had an absolutely enormous repertory, I mean, far more than you could possibly fit into one single recital. So the idea we had was that we would include extracts from the operas that Storchio premiered, and also a selection of her most important roles. And what was wonderful was that Storchio and Ermanela were really kind of an ideal match in terms of personalities and repertory. So the CD, in a way, also ends up painting a portrait of Ermanela's own career. So we have Lodoletta, which is extremely unknown. We have this very long, wonderful final scene, which Ermanela performed with huge success at Wigmore Hall in February. And then also 2 extracts from Massenet's Sappho, which now is very rarely performed, but which actually Ermanela was involved with at the Wexford Festival nearly 20 years ago. And then unusually for Opera Rara, also some much more familiar pieces. There's an extract from La Traviata, there's one from Madama Butterfly. So it's a really wonderful mixture of styles, and I think it's going to be a huge treat when this is finally released.
Wonderful, thank you very much, Ditlev. Yes, I must say we're very, very excited about this next project. It's something that we wanted to do since we first worked with Ermanela back in 2015 when she came to us to sing the title role in Zaza so memorably and so successfully. I would also say that alongside those releases that we're going to do, think of them as singles, if you like, before the main album album release on the 20th of September. Alongside those single releases, which starts on the 10th of July, we're also going to be releasing some video and some very special introductions recorded by Ermanella herself to this material. So please do mark those dates in your diary, and we hope you enjoy listening to the album. So our next question actually takes us back to Furioso, and it's asked by a very perceptive member of the Facebook audience tonight, because they clearly know that Carlo Rizzi has already conducted Furioso. And actually, yes, it's a very interesting question, one that I've been meaning to ask Carlo myself for some time, which is, Carlo, having conducted this piece already, what has made you want to return to it now with Opera Rara?
Well, good evening to everybody. I not have just conducted the piece, I've recorded the piece. Now that is even more strange in a way. Well, my point is actually very simple to explain. Sorry, I have a little bit of confusion here over the piano. Okay, you know, like everybody in lockdown, I started to put things, you know, to look into old things that I have. And I actually realized something that I didn't remember at the time, that I had, when I recorded this, that is the manuscript of the Furioso that I got when I did the first recording. And then I do remember that looking at the manuscript, this manuscript is very, very different from this, that is the new edition of Furioso. There are differences in what I've already recorded, and through the work of the musicologist Roger Parker and Eleonora Di Cinzio, other pieces being discovered. And also we have with Opera Rara, the fact that this will be a studio recording rather than a live recording. So all these things put together added to the point that for me was actually very interesting to do another recording. That doesn't mean that the first one, you know, was not good. Actually, it was a very, very good cast. There was Luciana Serra, Luca Canonici, Stefano Antonucci, if I remember correctly, in the three main role. Roberto Coviello was Kaidama. So it was a very good cast, but it was taken live in not a real completely professional way. So what we will have now from the point of view of the performance will be something that obviously will be, given that it's done in studio, will be of the better quality. And secondly, and more important, from the let's say the pedigree of Opera Rara, there will be certain things that have never been heard before, also because this has been just rediscovered. So this is why.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Carlo. And well, all of us at Opera Rara are delighted that you're going to have the opportunity to revisit the piece with us. And we hope that together we will do it a marvelous justice. We're very much looking forward to it. Another question which has come in relates to Donizetti, and it's actually a very pertinent question, because Donizetti, as I'm sure all of you know, wrote, I think, roughly 80 operas. This is an unbelievably prolific output, especially because he died so young. He would write these pieces tremendously quickly. Now, Opera Rara was started with the stated aim of recording every single one of them. And at this point, 50 years on, well, we're not doing too badly. We've actually are on number 27 right now. So we're over a third, and we're, you know, steaming ahead towards the half century. But Roger, I wonder if I could ask you to tell us a little bit more about Donizetti titles that you think are worthy of the Opera Rara treatment.
Yeah, it's Donizetti's the composer who goes on giving the gift there of Donizetti. It is extraordinary, actually, that the quality of the pieces that he wrote over his relatively short lifetime. I think one thing where Carlo and I are thinking about in particular at the moment are the earlier operas. The operas, I mean, he's often thought of Donizetti as coming to his maturity with Anna Bolena in 1830, but I think one of the things that becomes obvious is that there's a whole lot of operas previous to that, in the 5 years before that, which are really worth reviving. One of them was Il Paria, which we've already done, but I think the next one that we're seriously thinking about is L'esole di Roma, which is a sort of companion piece to Il Paria in some ways. It has a magnificent part for a bass baritone with a dramatic mad scene in the middle of it, and some tremendous dramatic innovations. So L'esole di Roma is probably the next, but just a few days ago, Carlo and I had a kind of rapid fire email exchange where we went through, I don't know how many titles, about 6 or 8 further titles from that period. And I almost guarantee that people won't have heard of La Lettera Anonima or Chiara e Serafina, but we're on the case. We're on the case. There's still more Donizetti out there.
Thank you very much, Roger. So there we are. There's some more Donizetti to look forward to. I would also say there are many other things to look forward to as well. Alongside the Donizetti strand, we are interested in French operetta, particularly the work of Offenbach. We're also looking at French grand opera. And also having started so successfully with Ermanella on the Verismo strand, we're also interested in continuing with that as well. What I think I would close this event by saying is that none of this work is possible without your help. Now, your help comes to us in many, many different ways, and it can be just simply participating in this event online this evening, because we hope that if you are new to Opera Rara, this might encourage you to engage with us a little bit more, perhaps by signing up onto our mailing list, perhaps being a customer, a buyer of some of our recordings. And if you are already a buyer, thank you very much indeed, because we're very, very grateful for your support. To those of you who help us financially, your support is invaluable. We recoup roughly 20% of what it takes to make a full studio opera recording. And it's those full studio opera recordings which rescue these neglected masterpieces from an undeserved obscurity, and they bring them back for today's, but more importantly, perhaps the audiences of tomorrow to enjoy. And this idea of legacy is incredibly important to us at Opera Rara, and it is very much the end point of what I call this journey of live operatic archaeology. So to those of you who do support us financially, we are tremendously grateful. To those of you who don't, if you would like to, there is, I believe, a donate now button at the bottom of your Facebook page, and if you would like to press that, then you will see ways in which you can support us. You can also find out more, not only about supporting us, but about all of the work that we do on our website, which is www.opera-rara.com. But for now, thank you again for staying with us. My apologies again for the technical hitch, which meant we had to go down temporarily, and thank you to those of you for staying with us. We very much hope you've enjoyed this evening. Thanks again, particularly to Ditlev Rindom, Roger Parker, and our marvelous artistic director, Carlo Rizzi. It's a pleasure to have worked with you on this, I think, very first live Facebook Q&A that Opera Rara has ever done. So from here, the only way is up. There will be more. Please keep in touch with us, and we look forward to seeing you online and in the concert hall very soon. Goodbye.